The sound of jingle bells echoed through the small apartment as Riley Morgan struggled with rolls of tape and colorful wrapping paper. At 28, she had transformed her living room into a veritable Christmas workshop. Scattered across the floor were dozens of carefully wrapped packages, each with a handwritten tag. "You're going to be late," warned Zoe, her roommate, leaning against the doorframe with a mug of hot chocolate. "And you still need to put on the costume." Riley blew away a strand of auburn hair that kept falling over her eyes. "Almost done. Just this special one left." Between her skilled fingers, an old Polaroid camera was being delicately wrapped in golden paper. Riley added a red bow and a small card before placing it in a decorated box. As a freelance photographer and volunteer at the Winter Wishes Foundation, Riley dedicated each Christmas to delivering personal gifts to executives of large companies who made significant donations. It wasn't glamorous work, but she loved seeing how even the most stern business people smiled when receiving something unexpected. "I think the great Blake Harrington is going to have a fit when he sees you dressed as Mrs. Claus," commented Zoe, laughing. Riley rolled her eyes as she stood up, stretching her sore back. "He probably won't even notice me. People like him live in another dimension." "The infamous Grinch of Chicago," Zoe made air quotes with her fingers. "I heard he cancelled Christmas at his company a few years ago." "He didn't cancel Christmas." Riley picked up the costume hanging behind the door. "He just transformed the Christmas party into a year-end strategic networking event." She imitated a serious, deep voice. 40 minutes later, Riley was parking her old red pickup truck near the Millennium Hotel, where the Harrington Tech event was taking place. Snow was beginning to fall more heavily, and according to forecasts, Chicago would face one of the biggest blizzards in recent years the following day. Christmas, dressed in an elegant red velvet outfit, low-heeled black boots, and a charming Mrs. Claus hat, Riley entered the hall carrying a large bag of presents. The decoration was stunning, but strangely impersonal, as if it had come straight out of a design catalog. "Riley, thank God you're here." Diane Keller, Harrington Tech's public relations director, approached hurriedly. Diane was a 50-year-old woman with perfectly arranged blonde hair and a rehearsed smile. "Are all the gifts in there?" "All 42, labeled and ready for delivery," confirmed Riley, adjusting her hat, "including the special one for Mr. Harrington." Diane lowered her voice. "About that, he's not a big fan of surprises. Maybe it's better to leave the gift on his table without personal interaction," completed Riley, already accustomed to difficult clients. "No problem." No, actually." Diane seemed uncomfortable. "I want you to deliver it personally. Maybe a little Christmas spirit is exactly what he needs." Riley gulped. It wasn't in her plans to confront the notorious CEO who, according to rumors, despised everything related to Christmas. For the next hour, she distributed carefully selected gifts to the company's top executives. Each present reflected something personal that Riley had discovered through social media research and information provided by Diane. A director passionate about baseball received an autographed ball. A manager who loved gardening got rare seeds. Riley discreetly observed Blake Harrington from afar. Tall, with dark brown hair and serious features, he seemed perpetually out of place amid the joy of the event. While everyone smiled and chatted animatedly, he maintained a polite but distant expression. His grey-blue eyes seemed to constantly assess the environment, as if looking for the nearest exit. It was after his speech, surprisingly sincere despite being brief, that Riley finally gathered the courage to approach him. "Mr. Harrington?" she called, holding the golden box. Blake turned, and for a moment Riley saw something in his eyes. Surprise? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it disappeared quickly, replaced by his usual controlled expression. "Mrs. Claus, I presume," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I didn't realize the North Pole had representatives in Chicago." Riley smiled, undeterred by his subtle sarcasm. "The Winter Wishes Foundation sends its regards, Mr. Harrington." "And this She extended the golden box. "Is a special thank you for your generous donation." Blake hesitated before accepting the gift, as if it might contain something dangerous. "The Foundation's policy is that you open it at midnight on Christmas Eve," Riley explained. "For good luck. I'm not particularly superstitious, Miss Morgan, Riley Morgan, and it's not about superstition, it's about tradition." A slight frown crossed his face. "Morgan, that name sounds familiar." Riley felt her heart skip a beat, but maintained her composed smile. "It's a common name." Blake studied her face for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Well, Miss Morgan, thank you for the gift. I make no promises about following opening instructions, but I appreciate the gesture." She was about to respond when Kevin Matthews, Blake's CFO, approached them with urgent news about the weather. "Blake, the snowstorm's accelerated. They're closing roads already. We should wrap this up and get everyone home safely." The remainder of the event was a blur of hasty goodbyes and hurried departures. Riley helped Diane ensure that all remaining gifts found their recipients before leaving herself. As she drove home through increasingly heavy snow, Riley couldn't help but wonder if Blake Harrington would actually open his gift at midnight, and what he would think when he discovered what was inside. The blizzard hit Chicago with unexpected force. By Christmas morning, the city was blanketed in over 2 feet of snow, with more still falling. Riley awoke to the sound of her phone ringing persistently. "Hello?" she answered groggily, squinting at her bedside clock. 9 in the morning. "Riley Morgan." A deep, familiar voice sent her bolting upright in bed. "Yes. Who is this?" "Blake Harrington. I believe we need to talk about the gift you gave me last night." Riley's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Harrington, how did you get my number?" "The same way I got your address," he replied matter-of-factly. "From the Foundation's records. I'm actually outside your building now." "Your what?" Riley jumped out of bed and rushed to her window. Through the curtain of falling snow, she could make out a sleek black Range Rover parked in front of her modest apartment building in Wicker Park. "But the roads are closed." "Not to everyone," he replied. "May I come up? It's rather cold out here." Riley looked around her apartment in panic. Wrapping paper was still scattered everywhere, dirty mugs sat on every surface, and she was wearing flannel pajamas with dancing reindeer. Give me 10 minutes." "5, he counted, and hung up. Exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds later, there was a knock at her door. Riley, now dressed in jeans and a green sweater, her hair hastily pulled back, took a deep breath before opening it. Blake Harrington stood in her doorway, snowflakes melting on his expensive wool coat. In his gloved hands was the golden box she had given him the night before, now unwrapped, and inside it the vintage Polaroid camera. "Miss Morgan," he said, his expression unreadable, "would you care to explain why you gave me a camera that once belonged to my parents?" Riley stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the vintage Polaroid camera in Blake Harrington's hands. The same camera she had spent months tracking down through online auctions and collectors' websites. "May I come in?" Blake asked, his tone surprisingly calm despite the accusatory question he'd just posed. "Unless you'd prefer to have this conversation in your hallway." "Of course." Riley stepped aside, suddenly hyper-aware of her modest apartment. "Sorry for the mess. I wasn't expecting company." "Especially not you." Blake entered, his tall frame and tailored clothing looking completely out of place among Riley's eclectic bohemian furnishings. He carefully removed his snow-dusted coat and glanced around, taking in the Christmas decorations that adorned every available surface. "You really embrace the holiday spirit," he observed, neither complimentary nor critical. Riley busied herself clearing wrapping paper from the couch. "Coffee or tea? I don't have any fancy espresso, just regular coffee." "Coffee would be fine, thank you." As Riley moved to the small kitchenette, Blake remained standing, examining the camera in his hands. It was a Polaroid SX70, a classic model from the 1970s with a leather case that showed signs of wear and love. "How did you get this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Riley measured coffee grounds into the filter, buying time to organize her thoughts. "It was part of an estate sale collection," she said finally, turning to face him. "I'm a photographer. I collect vintage cameras. When I saw the name Harrington engraved on the bottom, I did some research." She paused. "I didn't steal it, if that's what you're implying." Blake turned the camera over, running his thumb across the small silver plaque on the bottom that read, "Thomas and Eleanor Harrington, Christmas 1987. "This was my father's favorite camera," he said quietly. "He took it everywhere. After they died, I couldn't find it among their belongings. I assumed it was destroyed in the accident." The coffee maker gurgled in the background, filling the awkward silence between them. "I recognized your name last night," Blake continued. "Morgan. Your grandmother was Eleanor Morgan before she married my grandfather, wasn't she?" Riley nodded, surprised by his knowledge. "Yes, you did your research too. After I opened your gift at midnight, following instructions, I might add, I stayed up most of the night looking into how this camera could have possibly found its way to you." Riley poured 2 mugs of coffee and gestured toward the couch. "It's a long story. Maybe you should sit down." Blake hesitated, then relented, choosing the armchair rather than joining her on the sofa. Riley handed him a mug with a faded Chicago Cubs logo on it. "My grandmother, Martha Morgan, was your grandmother Eleanor's sister," Riley began, cradling her own mug. "They weren't close as adults, some old family disagreement I never fully understood, but after your parents' accident, some of their belongings were mistakenly sent to my grandmother's house in Michigan. She passed away 3 months ago, and while cleaning out her attic, I found a box with your family name on it." Blake's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around the mug. Inside was this camera, along with some photographs. Riley stood and retrieved a small wooden box from her bookshelf. "I was planning to contact Harrington Tech after the holidays to return everything, but then Diane hired me for the gift project, and it seemed, I don't know, meant to be." She placed the box on the coffee table between them. Blake stared at it for a long moment before setting down his coffee and reaching for it. "May I?" "Of course. They belong to you." Blake opened the box carefully. Inside were several dozen Polaroid photographs, their colors slightly faded with time. On top was a picture of a young couple standing in front of a Christmas tree, Thomas and Eleanor Harrington, holding a baby Blake. "I haven't seen this in years," he whispered, the controlled facade cracking just slightly. Riley watched as he sifted through the photographs, each one capturing moments of the Harrington family life, birthday parties, vacations, ordinary days made special through the lens of his father's beloved camera. Blake's expression remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed the emotional impact of these unexpected treasures. "There's something else," Riley said after a while. She reached into the box and pulled out an envelope from beneath the photos. "This was with the camera. It's addressed to you." Blake looked up sharply. "A letter?" "I don't know. I didn't open it." He took the envelope, studying his name written in his mother's elegant handwriting. For a moment, Riley thought he might open it right there, but instead he carefully returned it to the box. "Thank you for this," he said formally, closing the box. "I should compensate you for the camera. It must have cost—" "No," Riley interrupted firmly. "It's not a gift from me. It's yours. It's always been yours. I'm just the messenger." Blake studied her face, as if trying to detect an ulterior motive. "People don't usually do things without expecting something in return, Miss Morgan." "Riley," she corrected, "and maybe you've been spending time with the wrong people, Mr. Harrington." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Blake." The moment was interrupted by a loud rumble from outside. Riley moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. "Oh no," she groaned. "The plow just went by and created a mountain of snow behind your car." Blake joined her at the window, standing close enough that Riley could smell his expensive cologne, mingled with the winter air still clinging to his clothes. "That's unfortunate," he said, though he didn't sound particularly bothered. "The roads must be terrible if they're only just plowing now. You shouldn't have come out in this weather." Blake glanced down at her, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Are you concerned for my safety, Riley?" "I'm concerned for anyone crazy enough to drive in this blizzard," she retorted. "Even millionaire CEOs aren't immune to black ice." "True," he conceded. "Though I'm afraid this means I'll be imposing on your hospitality a bit longer, unless you'd prefer I try to dig out now." Riley looked again at the wall of snow behind his vehicle and the still heavily falling flakes. "No, that would be ridiculous. You're welcome to stay until the weather improves." She turned back to the room. "Though I'm afraid I don't offer the five-star accommodations you're probably used to." "I've survived worse," he said cryptically. Riley's phone chirped with an incoming message. "It's Zoe, my roommate. She's stuck at her parents' house in Evanston because of the snow. Looks like it's just us." Blake lifted an eyebrow, and Riley immediately felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, you're welcome to stay in her room if you need to. You know, if the roads don't clear, and I'm babbling, aren't I?" "Slightly," he confirmed, the hint of a smile returning. To Riley's surprise, Blake rolled up his sleeves and helped her clean up the remaining Christmas wrapping mess. As they worked, she couldn't help stealing glances at him. This powerful CEO who terrorized boardrooms was now carefully sorting ribbons in her cluttered living room. "You must think I'm crazy," Riley said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence that had developed. "For collecting vintage cameras or for dressing up as Mrs. Claus?" "Both, I guess, and for giving a complete stranger such a personal gift." Blake paused, holding a piece of red ribbon between his fingers. "We're not complete strangers, apparently. Our families have a connection, however distant. Still, it was presumptuous of me. I should have found a more professional way to return your family's belongings." Blake looked at the wooden box on the coffee table. "I might have ignored a letter or email from an unknown Morgan. Corporate gets thousands of contact attempts each week." His eyes met hers. "Your method, unconventional as it was, ensured I received this gift." He said the word as if testing its validity. "Well, that was the plan," Riley admitted, "though I didn't expect you to show up at my door on Christmas morning. I'm not known for my patience." As if on cue, Riley's stomach growled loudly. "I'm also interrupting your Christmas breakfast," Blake observed. "Actually, I hadn't planned anything special. Usually Zoe and I make pancakes, but—" She trailed off. Blake stood, surprising her again. "Then allow me to make myself useful. Do you have pancake ingredients?" Riley blinked. "You make pancakes?" "I wasn't born in a boardroom, Riley. I did attend college. Pancakes were a survival skill." He started toward her kitchen. "Unless you'd prefer to maintain the illusion that I'm completely helpless outside of my corporate castle." For the first time since he arrived, Riley laughed. "No, by all means. My kitchen is your kitchen, Blake Harrington, pancake chef." As she watched him confidently navigate her small kitchen, opening cabinets and gathering ingredients, Riley wondered how this bizarre Christmas had taken such an unexpected turn. Yesterday, Blake Harrington was just a name, a wealthy donor who reluctantly participated in holiday charity. Today, he was making pancakes in her kitchen, sharing coffee from her mismatched mugs, and rediscovering precious memories of his past. Outside, the blizzard continued, blanketing Chicago in white, keeping the city quiet and still on Christmas Day. Inside, surrounded by the scent of coffee and the sound of pancake batter being whisked, Riley couldn't help but feel that something important was beginning to take shape, as unexpected and perfect as the first snowflake of winter. "I'm impressed," Riley admitted, taking another bite of her pancakes. "These might be the best I've ever had. What's your secret?" Blake sat across from her at the small dining table, his own plate nearly empty. Sunlight filtered through the falling snow outside, casting a soft glow across the apartment. "Vanilla extract and a pinch of cinnamon," he answered, reaching for his coffee. "My mother taught me when I was 8. She believed everyone should know how to make at least one breakfast dish perfectly." "Wise woman," Riley nodded. "My dad was the cook in our family. Mum could burn water." Blake's eyes drifted to a framed photograph on Riley's wall. her parents smiling widely on a hiking trail, much younger versions of themselves. Are they nearby? Colorado now. They retired early and moved to Boulder 3 years ago. We do video calls on holidays. She glanced at her phone. Speaking of which, I should probably call them soon. A comfortable silence settled between them as they finished breakfast. Riley found herself studying Blake when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed slightly as he thought, how his fingers tapped lightly against the mug, the unexpected gentleness with which he handled the old photographs. In the morning light, away from corporate pressures, he seemed more human, less the intimidating figure she'd anticipated. I should check the weather report, Blake said, breaking the silence. He pulled out his phone, frowning at the screen. No service. The storm must have affected the towers. Riley reached for her laptop. Let me try the Wi-Fi. After a moment, she shook her head. Internet's down too. I guess we're officially cut off from civilization. How very 19th century of us, Blake remarked dryly. Riley laughed. We could check the radio. I think I have an old one somewhere. She rummaged through a cabinet and produced a vintage battery-powered radio. After some static and dial-turning, they caught a weather update. Chicago was experiencing its worst blizzard in 20 years, with accumulations of over 30 inches expected by evening. All roads were closed except for emergency vehicles, and power outages were reported throughout the city. Well, Blake said after the report ended, it appears I've truly imposed on your Christmas. It's not an imposition, Riley assured him. It's an adventure. How many people can say they spent Christmas Day snowbound with a tech billionaire? Millionaire, he corrected with unexpected modesty. And I'm sure it ranks low on your list of ideal Christmas scenarios. Riley tilted her head, studying him. Actually, my alternative was watching holiday movies alone and eating leftover Chinese food. This is definitely more interesting. Blake seemed about to respond when the lights flickered ominously. Both of them looked up at the ceiling fixture, watching as it dimmed, brightened, then went completely dark. Perfect timing, Riley sighed, getting up to check the window. Looks like the whole block is out. Blake immediately reached for his phone, activating the flashlight. Do you have candles? Better. I have an unhealthy obsession with emergency preparedness. Riley disappeared into a closet and returned with a battery-powered lantern, several flashlights, and a stack of blankets. Michigan winters with my grandmother taught me to always be ready for power outages. Impressive, Blake commented, genuinely surprised. Don't sound so shocked, Riley teased, setting up the lantern on the coffee table. Its warm glow created a cozy atmosphere in the increasingly chilly apartment. I may not run a tech empire, but I can handle a little power outage. I didn't mean, Blake began, then caught the playful look in her eyes. You're teasing me. Someone should, occasionally. Keeps you humble. She arranged the blankets on the sofa. We should conserve heat. The building has emergency generators, but they only power essential systems, not individual heating units. Blake nodded, removing his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves further. Riley couldn't help noticing how different he looked in this relaxed state. Less CEO, more human. So, Riley said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, what does Blake Harrington normally do on Christmas Day, when he's not stranded in a stranger's apartment during a historic blizzard? Blake hesitated, as if weighing how honest to be. Work, mostly. Review year-end reports, prepare for the January board meeting. Alone? Yes. The simplicity of his answer held a sadness that Riley hadn't expected. For how long? Since your parents? Yes. He picked up the wooden box of photographs, running his fingers along its edge. The holidays were their favorite time of year. It never felt right to celebrate after they were gone. Riley watched as he opened the box again, carefully lifting out the envelope with his name on it. I haven't read a letter from my mother in 10 years, he said quietly. Would you like some privacy? Riley offered, starting to stand. Blake looked up, surprising her. No, stay, please. Riley settled back into her blanket as Blake carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, covered in elegant handwriting. He read silently, his expression shifting subtly with each line, surprise, pain, and something like wonder crossing his features. When he finished, he stared at the paper for a long moment before folding it carefully and returning it to the envelope. "She knew," he said finally, his voice slightly rough. "Somehow she knew something might happen to them. This letter was written 3 weeks before the accident." Riley remained silent, giving him space to continue if he chose. "She wrote that life is unpredictable, and that if anything happened to them, she wanted me to remember that grief is just love with nowhere to go." Blake looked down at the box of photographs. "She said that when I was ready, I should use this camera to capture new memories, not just hold on to the old ones." "Your mother sounds wise," Riley said gently. "She was." Blake took a deep breath. "She also mentioned the Morgan family. She said that someday the past might find its way back to me, and when it did, I should be open to what it might bring." Riley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing heat. "That's eerily prescient." "Indeed." Blake studied her face. "Did you read the letter, Riley?" "No," she answered truthfully. "I wouldn't do that." He held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding, apparently satisfied. "So," he said, his tone deliberately lighter, "does this camera still work?" Riley smiled, grateful for the shift. "It should. I cleaned it and found film for it, but I haven't tested it." Blake removed the camera from its case, handling it with the care of someone rediscovering a treasured possession. "My father would take Polaroids of everything, not just special occasions, but ordinary moments. He said sometimes we don't realize which moments are important until after they've passed." "That's what I love about photography," Riley said, pulling her blanket tighter as the apartment grew colder. "It's not just about capturing beauty, but about preserving time." Blake looked up at her, a new curiosity in his expression. "Show me your work." "What?" "Your photographs." "You said you're a photographer." Riley hesitated. "They're nothing special, just freelance stuff, events, weddings, some magazine work." "I'd like to see them anyway." Something in his tone, not demanding as she might have expected, but genuinely interested, made Riley relent. She retrieved her portfolio from beside her desk and handed it to him. Blake took his time examining each page, studying the images with an attention that made Riley increasingly self-conscious. These weren't her corporate event photos, but her personal work. Street photography, portraits of strangers, urban landscapes of Chicago in all seasons. "These are extraordinary," he said finally, looking up at her. "You have a gift for capturing people in unguarded moments." Riley felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "Thank you. It's what I love most, finding the human story in each frame." "Is that why you volunteered for the Winter Wishes Foundation? To find stories?" She shook her head. "I started volunteering after my brother was hospitalized 3 years ago. The foundation provided gifts and support during his treatment. Once he recovered, I wanted to give back." "Your brother was ill?" "Leukemia. He's in remission now." Riley smiled at a memory. "During his treatment, a volunteer dressed as Santa visited the hospital. Josh was 17, too old to believe in Santa, but that visit gave him something to smile about during a dark time. That's why I don't mind dressing up as Mrs. Claus. Sometimes people need a little magic, even if they think they're too grown up for it." Blake's expression softened. "Even grumpy CEOs?" "Especially them," she teased, then shivered as a draft cut through the room. "You're cold," Blake observed, concern replacing amusement. "I'm fine," Riley insisted, though her chattering teeth betrayed her. To her surprise, Blake stood and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, bringing his blanket with him. "Body heat conservation," he explained, arranging the blankets over both of them. "Basic survival tactics." "Is that what they teach at Harvard Business School?" Riley asked, trying to ignore how aware she suddenly was of his proximity. "Princeton, actually. And no, I learned that during a skiing trip gone wrong in Vermont." His arm settled comfortably around her shoulders. My friend Kevin and I got caught in a sudden storm. We had to hunker down in a cabin for 2 days. The same Kevin from last night? Your CFO? Blake nodded. He's been with me since the beginning. One of the few people who knew me before I became, well, whatever it is people think I am now. The fearsome Blake Harrington, terror of the tech world. Is that what they say? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Among other things, Riley admitted, though I'm starting to think they don't know you very well. Blake was quiet for a moment. Perhaps I don't let them. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick curtains, the wind occasionally howling around the building's corners. Inside, in the warm glow of the lantern light, Riley found herself strangely comfortable with this man she barely knew, yet felt oddly connected to. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said suddenly. "Something that isn't in your official biography or company profile." Blake considered this. "I wanted to be a photographer when I was young," he finally said. "My father encouraged it, but after he died it seemed frivolous, impractical. So I followed his footsteps into business instead." "That's not frivolous," Riley protested. "Art is essential." "Says the professional photographer to the tech CEO," he replied, but without malice. "Art and business aren't mutually exclusive. Your company creates tools that help people communicate, share ideas, connect. That's a kind of art too." Blake looked at her with surprise. "I've never thought of it that way." "Maybe you should," she suggested. "Now your turn, ask me something. Why aren't you with your family today? You mentioned video calls, but before the power went out you weren't preparing for one." Riley sighed. "My parents are on a Christmas cruise, a gift from me and my brother. Josh is spending the holiday with his girlfriend's family in Toronto. We celebrated together last weekend, before everyone left. So you volunteered to work on Christmas Eve knowing you'd be alone on Christmas Day. Better to be busy than lonely," she said simply, "and I love seeing people's reactions to their gifts." Blake's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "I'm sorry I intruded on your solitude." "Don't be," Riley said honestly. "This is already the most interesting Christmas I've had in years. Being trapped without power with a workaholic stranger. Being snowbound with a surprisingly decent pancake chef who's much less terrifying than his reputation suggests." Blake laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face completely. Riley found herself staring, captivated by this rare glimpse of unguarded joy. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Nothing," she said quickly. "It's just, you should laugh more often. It suits you." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Riley became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how natural his arm felt around her shoulders, how the lantern light softened his features and warmed his eyes. The moment was broken by a loud thump from outside, followed by a scraping sound. "What was that?" Blake asked, instantly alert. Riley reluctantly moved away from his warmth to peer out the window. "The building maintenance crew. They're trying to clear the sidewalks." She turned back to him. "Don't get too excited. The roads are still completely buried." "I wasn't planning an escape," Blake said quietly. Something in his tone made Riley's heart beat a little faster. This was dangerous territory, finding herself attracted to a man who lived in a completely different world. Tomorrow, when the snow cleared and power returned, Blake Harrington would go back to his penthouse and his empire, and Riley Morgan would return to her freelance jobs and volunteer work. But today, in the quiet cocoon created by the blizzard, with only lantern light and shared blankets, tomorrow seemed very far away indeed. As afternoon settled into evening, the apartment grew steadily colder. The temperature outside had plummeted to single digits, and without heat Riley could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. "We need to get creative about staying warm," she said, rummaging through kitchen drawers. "Aha!" She triumphantly held up a box of matches and several thick candles. Blake, who had been examining her bookshelf, turned with raised eyebrows. "I thought the lantern was sufficient." "For light, yes, but candles generate a surprising amount of heat." Riley began placing them strategically around the living room. "And I have a gas stove. We can boil water to create some steam heat." "You've done this before." Blake observed. Grandmother Morgan's house lost power at least once every winter. Riley lit the candles one by one. She taught me all the tricks. The bathroom is the smallest room, so it'll retain heat better. If it gets unbearable out here, we can move in there. How practical, Blake said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Though I must say, this is not how I envisioned spending Christmas Day, contemplating relocation to a stranger's bathroom. Riley laughed. Life's full of surprises. Yesterday I didn't envision spending Christmas with the CEO of Harrington Tech making pancakes in my kitchen. Fair point. While Riley filled a kettle with water, Blake continued exploring the apartment, stopping at a wall covered with photographs, not professional prints but personal snapshots. Your family? He asked, studying an image of Riley with her arms around a young man who shared her auburn hair and smile. Yes, that's Josh, my brother. She joined him at the wall. That was taken right after his final treatment. We celebrated with a weekend in Michigan. Blake moved to another photo, a much younger Riley, perhaps 8 or 9, sitting on the shoulders of a bearded man, both laughing wildly. Your father? Yes, at the county fair. He let me eat so much cotton candy I got sick on the Ferris wheel. She smiled at the memory. He never let me forget it, but he also bought me more cotton candy the next year. Blake's expression softened. You have a good relationship with your parents. I'm lucky, Riley acknowledged. They've always supported my choices, even when they didn't understand them. Dad wanted me to pursue business, but when I chose photography, he bought me my first professional camera. My father would have understood your passion, Blake said quietly. He believed in following one's talents wherever they led. Yet you chose his path instead of your own, Riley observed gently. Blake turned away from the photos. Someone had to keep the company going. 400 employees depended on it. That's a heavy responsibility to take on at, what were you, 25? 26, he corrected, old enough to know what needed to be done. Riley studied his profile, seeing beyond the confident exterior to the young man who had shouldered an enormous burden after losing his parents, but not old enough to know that you could have honored your father's legacy while still honoring your own dreams. Blake looked at her sharply. You're very direct, aren't you? Sorry, Riley winced. Occupational hazard. Photographers learn to see what others try to hide. The kettle whistled, breaking the tension. Riley hurried to the kitchen to remove it from the flame, grateful for the interruption. She'd overstepped, making assumptions about a life she knew nothing about. Would you like tea? She called, keeping her tone light. I have chamomile Earl Grey, or some weird herbal blend my roommate buys. Earl Grey, thank you, Blake answered, his voice closer than she expected. Riley turned to find him leaning against the kitchen doorframe, watching her with an unreadable expression. I didn't mean to pry, she said, dropping tea bags into 2 mugs. Your choices are your own. You weren't entirely wrong, Blake admitted. I did set aside certain aspirations when I took over Harrington Tech, but it wasn't just obligation. I genuinely wanted to build something that would last, something worthy of my parents' legacy. And you have, Riley said, pouring the boiling water. Harrington Tech is incredibly successful. Financially, yes. Blake accepted the steaming mug she offered, but I sometimes wonder if my father would recognize the company it's become. He started it to create tools that would bring people together. Now we're just another tech giant fighting for market share. The vulnerability in his admission surprised Riley. It's not too late to change direction. Blake gave her a wry smile. Says the idealist to the pragmatist. Sometimes idealists see possibilities that pragmatists miss, Riley countered, leading them back to the living room where the candles had created a warm, golden atmosphere. They settled back onto the sofa, once again sharing blankets against the deepening cold. The storm outside had intensified, wind howling around the building's corners. Your turn to ask a question, Riley said, sipping her tea. Blake considered for a moment. Why photography? What drew you to it? The question pleased her. It was thoughtful, not the usual polite inquiry she received at parties. My grandfather, My father's father was a photographer for National Geographic. He traveled the world, capturing moments of extraordinary beauty and humanity. Riley smiled at the memory. When I was 10, he gave me my first camera and told me that photographs are proof that even fleeting moments can last forever. After he died, I found comfort in seeing the world through a lens, preserving moments that would otherwise be lost to time. Like the photographs in that box, Blake said, nodding toward his parents' pictures. Exactly. Without your father's camera, those memories might exist only in your mind, growing fainter with time. Blake was quiet for a moment, contemplating his tea. I stopped looking at photos of them after the accident. It was too painful. And now, he glanced at the wooden box. Now I'm grateful to have them back. It's still painful, but it's a different kind of pain. Less sharp, more bittersweet. That's grief evolving, Riley said softly, moving from raw wound to tender scar. Blake looked at her with renewed interest. You sound like you're speaking from experience. My grandfather, and a friend in college who died in an accident. Riley drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. Grief is universal, but uniquely personal. No two people experience it the same way. Is that why you volunteered for the foundation? To help others through their grief? Riley considered this. Partly, perhaps, but it's more about creating moments of joy in difficult times. A photograph captures a split second of existence. My volunteer work tries to create those moments worth capturing. The candles flickered as a draft whispered through the apartment. Riley shivered despite the blankets. We should conserve our resources, Blake suggested. The power might not return until morning. Good idea. I'll extinguish most of the candles. Riley began moving around the room, leaving only a strategic few burning. We should also eat something. I have bread and peanut butter. Not exactly a Christmas feast, but it'll do. Allow me, Blake said, standing to follow her to the kitchen. I make an excellent peanut butter sandwich. Another survival skill from college? Indeed. I've expanded my culinary repertoire since then, but one never forgets the classics. They worked side by side in the dimly lit kitchen, the simple task creating an unexpected intimacy. Riley found herself hyper-aware of each accidental brush of hands, each shared smile in the candlelight. Do you cook? Blake asked as he spread peanut butter with surprising precision. Basics only. Pasta, stir-fry, anything that can be made in one pan. Riley sliced an apple she'd found in the refrigerator. My roommate is the chef between us. She's taking culinary classes. Hence the excessive collection of spices, Blake noted, indicating the overflowing spice rack. Most of which I can't pronounce, Riley admitted. But she makes amazing food, so I don't complain. They carried their modest meal back to the living room, where the temperature had dropped noticeably. Riley's teeth chattered slightly as she sat. This isn't working, Blake said, setting down his plate. The heat is dissipating faster than the candles can replace it. I have an electric blanket, but without power. Riley trailed off, rubbing her hands together. Blake checked his watch. A simple yet undoubtedly expensive timepiece. It's only 6 o'clock. This could be a very long night. Wait, Riley said suddenly. Mrs. Abernathy in 4C has a generator. She might let us warm up there. As if in response, a soft knock sounded at the door. Riley wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and went to answer it. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes stood in the hallway, holding a battery-powered lantern. Mrs. Abernathy, I was just talking about you, Riley exclaimed. Hello, dear. I've got my generator running and a pot of soup on the stove. I'm inviting neighbors to warm up. You're welcome to join us. That's incredibly kind, Riley said, genuinely touched. I actually have a guest. She gestured toward Blake, who had appeared behind her. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the tall, obviously wealthy man standing in Riley's living room. Any friend of Riley's is welcome, she said warmly after her initial surprise. I have plenty of soup. Thank you, ma'am, Blake said with unexpected charm. That's very generous. "Bring your blankets," Mrs. Abernathy advised. "The hallway is freezing." Day-shoo. 10 minutes later, they were settled in the elderly woman's cozy apartment, which was significantly warmer thanks to a small but efficient generator humming on her balcony. Mrs. Abernathy had transformed her living room into a neighborhood haven, with the Rodriguez family from 4A and a young couple from 4D already gathered around her dining table, enjoying homemade vegetable soup. Blake, Riley noticed, seemed momentarily out of his element amid the casual neighborly gathering. But to her surprise, he quickly adapted, helping Mrs. Abernathy carry bowls from the kitchen and engaging in conversation with Mr. Rodriguez about the challenges of running a small family restaurant in Chicago's competitive dining scene. "Your young man is very nice, Mrs." Abernathy whispered to Riley in the kitchen as they prepared more bowls. "How long have you been dating?" "Oh, we're not," Riley began, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He's not we just met yesterday, actually." Mrs. Abernathy raised a knowing eyebrow. "Chemistry like that doesn't need time, dear. My Harold proposed after 3 days, and we were married 52 years. Riley didn't know how to respond, so she busied herself arranging crackers on a plate, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the older woman's observation. The evening progressed with surprising warmth and camaraderie. The Rodriguez children taught everyone a card game their grandmother had taught them. The young couple from 4D shared cookies they'd baked before the power outage. Mrs. Abernathy told stories of Chicago blizzards from decades past. Through it all, Riley found her attention repeatedly drawn to Blake, who seemed to be experiencing something entirely new, an ordinary Christmas with ordinary people who expected nothing from him except conversation and company. "This is quite different from your usual Christmas, I imagine," Riley said quietly, when they found themselves momentarily alone by the window. Blake watched the snow swirling in the darkness outside. "Completely. I'm usually alone in my office or my apartment." "Regrets?" she asked, only half joking. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Not at all. This is refreshing. No pretense, no agenda, just people being kind to each other." "The true spirit of Christmas," Riley said, then immediately felt self-conscious. "Sorry, that sounded cheesy." "No," Blake said, his voice soft. "It's accurate." Their eyes met in the gentle light of Mrs. Abernathy's apartment, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away, the storm, the neighbors, the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Riley felt something shift between them, something unnamed but unmistakable. The moment was broken by Mrs. Abernathy, announcing that she'd found her old phonograph and wind-up record player. Soon, the scratchy sounds of Bing Crosby filled the apartment, and everyone joined in singing "White Christmas," a song that had never felt more appropriate. Blake didn't sing, but Riley caught him watching her as she did, his expression unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. When their eyes met again, he didn't look away. Outside, the blizzard continued to transform Chicago into a winter wonderland, while inside, sheltered from the storm, something unexpected was beginning to bloom, as delicate and beautiful as the first snowflake of winter, and just as unique. It was nearly midnight when Riley and Blake returned to her apartment, their brief journey through the freezing hallway making the still cold space seem even more uninviting. "Mrs. Abernathy invited us to sleep on her couch," Riley said, wrapping her blanket tighter. "Maybe we should have accepted and deprived the Rodriguez children of their fort." Blake smiled, referencing the elaborate blanket construction the family's twin boys had created in Mrs. Abernathy's living room. "True. Those kids have impressive architectural skills." Riley flicked on her lantern. "Besides, the power could come back any minute." As if mocking her optimism, the wind howled more fiercely outside, rattling the windows. A glance outside revealed only darkness. The entire neighborhood remained without electricity. "At least we've been fed," Blake said, trying to sound positive. The generous Mrs. Abernathy had insisted they take a thermos of hot soup and some homemade bread when they left. Riley checked her phone. Still no service. I hope my parents aren't worried. They probably assume you're just experiencing the blackout like everyone else, Blake reasoned. He hesitated, then added, my security team, on the other hand, is likely organizing a search party. Oh, God, Riley groaned. I didn't even think about that. Will you be in trouble? Blake's laugh surprised her. I'm 35 years old, Riley. I don't get in trouble. Though Kevin is probably having a coronary right now. Poor Kevin. First he has to work on Christmas Eve, and now he's spending Christmas Day worrying about his boss. Kevin's Jewish, actually. He volunteers to work during Christmas so others can be with their families. Blake moved to sit on the couch, which had become their default base of operations. And he's used to my occasional disappearances. Riley raised an eyebrow as she joined him. Disappearances? That sounds intriguing. Nothing so dramatic. Sometimes I need space from being Blake Harrington, CEO, and just drive. No destination, no schedule. Where do you go? Lake Michigan shoreline, usually. Small towns where nobody knows me. He shrugged. It's not particularly exciting. It's human, Riley said simply. Everyone needs to escape sometimes. They fell into comfortable silence. Riley was acutely aware of how natural it felt to sit beside this man she'd known for barely 24 hours, how easily they'd fallen into conversation, how comfortable the silences between them had become. Are you seeing anyone? Blake asked suddenly, the question hanging in the cold air between them. Riley's heart skipped. No, she answered honestly. I broke up with someone about 8 months ago. He was a photojournalist, always traveling, always chasing the next big story. You didn't want to travel. I did initially. We met in a photography workshop in New Mexico. The whole adventurous lifestyle seemed romantic. Riley pulled her knees up under her blanket. But eventually I realized I wanted roots too, a home base, a community, like what we experienced tonight at Mrs. Abernathy's. And he didn't want that. He didn't want to be tied down, as he put it. Riley made air quotes with her fingers. What about you? Is there a Mrs. Harrington to be somewhere wondering why you're not answering your phone? Blake shook his head. No. I dated someone seriously about 2 years ago, but it ended. May I ask why? He seemed to consider how much to share. Natasha is brilliant. A corporate attorney. We made sense on paper. Same circles. Complementary careers. But eventually, she said she felt like she was dating a press release, not a person. Ouch, Riley winced. She wasn't entirely wrong, Blake admitted. I've spent so long being Blake Harrington, CEO, that sometimes I forget how to just be Blake. Which one am I talking to now? Riley asked softly. Blake's eyes met hers in the lantern light. Right now? Just Blake. Something in his gaze made Riley's breath catch. The intimacy of the moment, sitting close under blankets, surrounded by candlelight, cut off from the outside world, felt both surreal and more genuine than any connection she'd experienced in years. Can I ask you something? She ventured. Anything. Why did you really come here today? You could have called or sent someone else with the camera. Blake was quiet for a long moment. The truth. Always. I couldn't stop thinking about you. His admission hung in the air. After I opened that gift and saw the camera, I spent hours researching who Riley Morgan could be, how she might have obtained my father's camera. But it wasn't just curiosity about the camera. He paused. There was something about you, the way you approached me at the party, unintimidated, genuine, different. Riley felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with blankets or candles. Most people I meet want something from me, Blake continued. Money, connections, validation. You just wanted to deliver a gift that wasn't even from you. And when I discovered our families were connected, however distantly, he shook his head slightly. I had to see you again. I told myself it was about the camera, but it wasn't, Riley finished quietly. No. His eyes held hers. It wasn't. The confession hung between them, changing the atmosphere in the cold apartment. Riley was acutely aware of their proximity, of the soft glow of the lantern illuminating Blake's features, softening the angles of his face. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake's hand found hers beneath the blankets, his fingers warm against her cold ones. The simple touch sent electricity through her veins. "Even though I invaded your Christmas and got us stranded without power?" he asked, a hint of his earlier humor returning. "Especially because of that," Riley smiled. "Best Christmas surprise ever." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "Riley Morgan, you are unlike anyone I've ever met." "Is that a good thing?" "It's an extraordinary thing." The magnetism between them was undeniable now, pulling them closer until Riley could feel Blake's breath, warm against her cheek. His free hand came up to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, lingering against her skin. "I should warn you," she murmured. "I don't make a habit of kissing billionaires I've just met." "Millionaire," he corrected with a smile. "And I don't make a habit of being stranded in blizzards with beautiful photographers." "First time for everything," Riley suggested, her heart racing. "First time for something that matters," Blake replied, and closed the distance between them. His lips met hers softly at first, a question rather than a demand. Riley answered by leaning into him, her hand finding the solid warmth of his chest. The kiss deepened, transforming from tentative to certain, as if they were discovering something both new and somehow familiar. When they finally broke apart, Riley kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Blake was watching her with an expression of wonder. "That was unexpected?" Riley supplied. "I was going to say inevitable." Blake smiled, his hand still cradling her face. Riley laughed softly, pretty confident for someone who just met me yesterday. "I'm a quick study." He kissed her again, briefly this time. "And I recognize valuable opportunities when I see them." "Is that what I am? A valuable opportunity?" Riley teased, though her heart was still racing. "You're a miracle," Blake said with unexpected sincerity. "A Christmas miracle who showed up dressed as Mrs. Claus, carrying a piece of my past that I thought was lost forever." The raw emotion in his voice touched something deep within Riley. This wasn't the calculating CEO speaking, but the man beneath the corporate armor. A man who had carried grief and responsibility for a decade, suddenly confronted with unexpected connection. Outside, the storm continued to blanket Chicago in snow and silence. Inside, wrapped in borrowed warmth and newfound affection, Riley and Blake talked into the night, exchanging stories, sharing dreams, and discovering the many threads that seemed to have been drawing them together long before they ever met. "My mother would have liked you," Blake said drowsily as the night deepened. They had rearranged the couch cushions and blankets into a makeshift bed, huddled together against the cold. "Because I gave you her husband's camera?" Riley asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Because you see beyond the surface," he murmured, his arms tightening around her. She always said that was the most important skill in life, seeing what's really there, not just what appears to be. "Your mother sounds wise," Riley said, fighting to keep her eyes open as exhaustion began to claim her. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way you did," Blake said softly. "Through her letter, through these photographs, through me." Riley smiled at that, too tired to respond, but deeply moved by the sentiment. As she drifted towards sleep, comfortable despite the cold and the unusual circumstances, she couldn't help but marvel at how dramatically her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, Blake Harrington had been a name on a donor list, a distant figure she was assigned to deliver a gift to. Today, he was holding her as they fell asleep, their breaths synchronizing, their lives inexplicably intertwined. Tomorrow remained uncertain. The storm would eventually pass, power would be restored. The real world, with all its complications and differences, would reassert itself. Blake would return to his corporate kingdom and Riley to her modest freelance existence. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary created by the blizzard, none of that mattered. Tonight, they were just Riley and Blake, two people who had found each other against improbable odds, sharing warmth and connection as Christmas Day gave way to the promise of something new. Riley's last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of her grandmother Martha, who had unintentionally set this entire extraordinary sequence of events in motion. "Thank you," she whispered silently, wondering if somehow, somewhere, both her grandmother and Blake's parents were watching their unexpected encounter unfold with knowing smiles. Outside, the wind gradually began to calm, the snowfall slowing as Christmas night surrendered to the first hints of dawn. The worst of the blizzard had passed, though its effects would linger for days to come. Inside, nestled together on Riley's makeshift sofa bed, two people from different worlds dreamed of possibilities neither had imagined just one day before, possibilities as endless and unique as the snowflakes that had brought them together. Riley awoke to the sound of humming electronics and a sudden brightness behind her eyelids. The power had returned. For a disoriented moment, she wasn't sure where she was, until she felt the solid warmth of Blake's chest beneath her cheek and remembered everything: the blizzard, the cold night, the unexpected connection that had blossomed between them. "Good morning." Blake's voice rumbled beneath her ear, deeper and rougher with sleep. Riley lifted her head to look at him, momentarily self-conscious about her appearance after sleeping in her clothes. "Morning. Power's back." "So I see." Blake smiled, reaching up to tuck a wayward strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was casual, intimate, as if they'd been waking up together for years rather than for the first time. "What time is it?" Riley asked, reluctantly disentangling herself from their shared blankets. Blake checked his watch. Just after 7. The apartment had begun to warm as the heating system kicked back in. Outside, the world was transformed. A pristine blanket of white covered everything, glittering in the morning sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a beautiful but challenging landscape. "You should check my phone," Blake said, sitting up and stretching. "Kevin's probably organized a search party by now." Sure enough, as soon as their phones reconnected to the network, both began chiming with messages. Riley had several worried texts from her parents and brother, while Blake's screen lit up with what appeared to be dozens of notifications. "Everything okay?" Riley asked, putting on a pot of coffee. "Depends on your definition of okay," Blake replied, scrolling through messages. "The company is fine. Kevin is, as predicted, having a meltdown about my whereabouts. And apparently, I've made the local news." "What?" Riley nearly dropped the coffee filter. Blake turned his phone so she could see a news headline. "Tech CEO missing during historic blizzard. Harrington Tech offers reward for information." "Oh my God," Riley groaned. "That's dramatic." "Welcome to my life," Blake said with a wry smile. "Kevin tends to overreact." "Shouldn't you call him? Let him know you're alive?" Blake was already dialing. The conversation was brief but animated, with Blake repeatedly assuring his CFO that he was perfectly fine and had simply been waiting out the storm in a safe location. He made no mention of Riley or their unexpected Christmas together, which gave her a strange pang of something: disappointment, uncertainty. When he hung up, Blake looked apologetic. "My driver will be here as soon as the main roads are cleared, probably within the hour. They've prioritized emergency routes." "Of course," Riley nodded, trying to mask her feelings. What had she expected? That they would remain in this snow globe world forever? "You must have a lot to catch up on." Blake studied her face. "Riley, about last night—" "It's okay," she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say. "It was an unusual situation. Extreme circumstances. We can just—" "Don't," Blake said firmly, crossing the room to stand before her. "Don't diminish what happened between us." Riley met his gaze, searching for sincerity and finding it. I know your life is complicated. You have responsibilities, expectations, and I'm—" "Extraordinary," Blake finished, taking her hands in his. "What happened wasn't because of the blizzard or convenience or proximity. It happened because there's something between us that deserves to be explored." Hope fluttered in Riley's chest. Really? Really, he confirmed. I don't know exactly what happens next, but I know I'm not ready to say goodbye to Riley Morgan after one day. The coffee maker beeped, but neither of them moved, standing close together in the morning light. Your world is very different from mine, Riley said softly. You run a tech empire. I freelance and volunteer. You have board meetings and investors. I have community potlucks with Mrs. Abernathy. And last night, those worlds collided beautifully, Blake reminded her. Maybe they're not as incompatible as you think. Before Riley could respond, her phone rang. It was Zoe, checking in after finally getting cell service back at her parents' house. Riley gave her a heavily edited version of her Christmas experience, aware of Blake watching her with amusement as she carefully avoided mentioning that the CEO of Harrington Tech was currently standing in their kitchen. After she hung up, Blake raised an eyebrow. Edited for content? Some stories are too complicated for a quick phone call, Riley explained, pouring them both coffee. Besides, would you have wanted me to say, oh, and by the way, Blake Harrington spent the night on our couch and we kissed during a power outage? Fair point. Blake accepted the mug she offered. Though technically you kissed me back. Semantics, Riley smiled, feeling some of the morning awkwardness dissolve. They moved to the window, watching as city workers and neighbors began the massive task of digging out. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of camaraderie as people helped each other clear walkways and free buried cars. Look at that, Riley said, nodding toward a group of children who had already begun building an enormous snowman in the courtyard below. They're making the best of it. A valuable life skill, Blake agreed, his arms settling comfortably around her waist. They stood like that for a while, sipping coffee and watching the world outside, each privately contemplating what would happen when their snow globe reality finally shattered. Blake's phone chimed with a message. My driver's made it to Lakeshore Drive. He'll be here within 20 minutes. Reality intruded, sharp and unavoidable. You should gather your things, Riley said, stepping away from him. Blake caught her hand. Come to dinner with me, tonight. Tonight? Riley laughed. Half the city is still buried in snow. I know people who know people, he said with a smile. Say yes. The intensity in his eyes made her heart race. Yes. Good. He squeezed her hand before releasing it. Now, I believe my father's camera is still here somewhere. Together they collected the wooden box of photographs and the vintage Polaroid. Blake examined the camera with renewed interest. I haven't actually tried it yet, he said. Is there still film in it? There should be 8 shots left, Riley confirmed. I loaded it before wrapping it. Blake lifted the camera, pointing it at Riley. Smile. Wait, I'm not... But the flash had already gone off, capturing her morning dishevelment and surprise. The camera whirred and ejected the developing photograph. Blake carefully set it on the coffee table, watching as the image slowly appeared. Riley, with tousled hair and wide eyes, clutching her coffee mug, beautiful in her unguarded moment. Perfect, he declared. The first of my new collection. Riley blushed. Hardly photography-worthy. My father would disagree, Blake said, his expression softening. He believed the most valuable photographs are the ones that capture real moments, not posed perfection. A wise man, Riley said, moving closer to examine the photo as it continued to develop. You have his eyes, you know. I noticed it in the old pictures. Blake seemed pleased by this observation. My mother always said the same thing. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Abernathy, rosy-cheeked and bearing fresh muffins. Good morning, dears. I thought you might want some breakfast now that the power's back. Mrs. Abernathy, you're an angel, Riley said, accepting the basket gratefully. I saw the news, the elderly woman said, looking pointedly at Blake. You're causing quite a stir, young man. Blake had the good grace to look abashed. An overreaction by my staff. I apologize for any concern it may have caused. Mrs. Abernathy waved this away. At my age, a little excitement is welcome. Besides, it's not every day we have a celebrity snowbound in our building. She winked at Riley, though some of us got luckier than others. with our house guests." Riley felt her cheeks flush as Blake chuckled beside her. After Mrs. Abernathy departed with a knowing smile, Blake's phone buzzed again. "My drivers reached your street. Apparently, he had to negotiate with some city workers to get priority ploughing." "Negotiate?" Riley raised an eyebrow. "Harrington Tech is making a generous donation to the City Workers Fund," Blake explained with a small smile. "Everyone wins." The reality of their imminent separation settled over them. Riley helped Blake into his coat, now dry after hanging near the heating vent overnight. "Thank you," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "for the gift, for the shelter, for everything." "Thank you for the pancakes," Riley replied, trying to keep her tone light, despite the emotion welling in her throat. "And for not being the corporate monster everyone says you are." "Only slightly monstrous," he agreed, his eyes crinkling. A text notification announced the driver's arrival downstairs. Their time in the snow globe had officially ended. Blake pulled Riley close, his kiss deep and unhurried, a promise rather than a goodbye. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. "Tonight," he said softly, 7 o'clock. "I'll be here," Riley promised, "though I can't guarantee the roads will be." "I'll send a snowmobile if necessary," Blake assured her with a final smile before collecting his box of photographs and heading for the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "One more thing." Blake raised the Polaroid and captured another image. Riley framed in the doorway of her apartment, morning light illuminating her from behind. "Something to keep me company until tonight," he explained, carefully tucking the developing photo into his coat pocket. And then he was gone, leaving Riley standing in her doorway, the apartment suddenly emptier than it had ever felt before. 6 hours later, Riley stood before her closet, surrounded by discarded outfits, while Zoe, who had returned home full of questions, sat cross-legged on the bed. "Let me get this straight," Zoe said for perhaps the 5th time. "Blake Harrington, the Blake Harrington, got stranded here during the blizzard, made you pancakes, cuddled with you during the power outage, kissed you senseless, and now you're having dinner with him tonight?" "That's the condensed version, yes," Riley confirmed, holding up a green dress before discarding it. "And nothing fits right, and my hair is impossible, and this is a terrible idea." "It's a fantastic idea," Zoe corrected, jumping up to rummage through Riley's closet herself. "The man braved a historic blizzard to see you. He's clearly smitten." "He came for the camera," Riley reminded her, though she knew that wasn't entirely true anymore. "He stayed for you," Zoe countered, pulling out a deep blue wrap dress Riley had forgotten she owned. This is perfect." An hour later, Riley was transformed. The blue dress complemented her auburn hair, which Zoe had expertly styled into loose waves. Simple gold jewelry and light makeup completed the look. "You look beautiful," Zoe declared. "Like yourself, but the fancy version." Precisely at 7, Riley's phone buzzed with a message from Blake. "Look outside." Riley and Zoe rushed to the window to see a sleek black SUV parked below. But what made them both gasp was the path to it. Someone had meticulously cleared not just a walkway, but a red carpet-worthy path from her building's door to the vehicle, bordered by dozens of lanterns glowing golden in the early evening darkness. "Oh my God," Zoe breathed. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever seen." A knock at the door revealed a uniformed driver holding a small package. Inside was a vintage Polaroid photograph, one Riley had never seen before, of a young couple standing beside a snow-covered car, laughing despite what appeared to be a blizzard around them. On the back, in Blake's handwriting, "My parents, stranded in a snowstorm on their 3rd date." History has a way of repeating itself in the most beautiful ways. B. Accompanying the photo was a note. "Dinner awaits. I promised you a snowmobile, but I hope this will suffice." "Go," Zoe urged, practically pushing Riley toward the door. "Your chariot awaits." The driver escorted Riley down the carefully cleared path to the waiting SUV. When the door opened, Riley was surprised to find Blake himself sitting inside, rather than waiting at some restaurant. "Change of plans," he explained, as she slid in beside him. The city is still largely paralyzed, and most restaurants remain closed. He took her hand. So I thought we'd try something different. The SUV wound through partially cleared streets, eventually turning onto Lakeshore Drive, where the plows had created passable lanes. They drove north along the shoreline, the frozen lake stretching endlessly to their right, until they reached a familiar sight, Harrington Tower, the sleek glass headquarters of Blake's company. "Work dinner?" Riley asked, uncertain. "Not exactly," Blake smiled, leading her into the building and toward a private elevator. The elevator ascended to the top floor, opening directly into a space that took Riley's breath away. The executive office had been transformed, desk and conference table removed, replaced by a single intimate table, set for two beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered city and lake beyond. Hundreds of candles and lanterns illuminated the space, creating a warm, golden atmosphere reminiscent of their night during the power outage. "Blake," Riley breathed, taking in the spectacular view and romantic setting. "This is too much?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Perfect," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Absolutely perfect." As they settled at the table, a private chef appeared from what must have been a hidden executive kitchen, serving an exquisite meal paired with perfectly selected wines. "I hope you don't mind," Blake said between courses. "I asked Kevin about your food preferences." "You told Kevin about me?" Riley asked, surprised. "I did." Blake's expression was serious. "I'm not interested in hiding whatever this is between us, Riley. I spent too many years compartmentalizing my life, work separate from personal, past separate from present. I don't want to do that anymore." The honesty in his voice touched her deeply. "What did Kevin say?" Blake laughed. "After he recovered from the shock that I'd spent the blizzard with the mysterious Mrs. Claus from the party, he said it explained a lot about my recent behavior." "What behavior?" "Apparently, I've been smiling more today than he's seen in years." Blake's hand found hers across the table. "You've changed something in me, Riley. In one day, you've helped me remember parts of myself I thought were lost." Riley felt tears threatening. "It's not me. It's you allowing yourself to remember. The camera, the photographs, they were just catalysts." "Perhaps," Blake conceded, "but I think it's also you. Your perspective, your warmth, your ability to see beyond the surface." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I know this is fast. I know our worlds are different, but I also know I want to explore whatever this is between us." "I want that too," Riley admitted softly. After dinner, Blake led her to a door she hadn't noticed, opening it to reveal a rooftop garden, now transformed into a winter wonderland. Heat lamps had melted strategic paths through the snow, creating a magical illuminated walkway beneath the stars. "My father proposed to my mother up here," Blake said as they stood at the edge, Chicago spread out before them like a field of diamonds on black velvet. "He built this garden for her when they first established the company." "It's beautiful," Riley said, drawing her wrap tighter against the cold. Blake slipped off his suit jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was old-fashioned, chivalrous, and touched Riley deeply. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small box. Riley's eyes widened in alarm, making Blake laugh. "Not that kind of box," he assured her. "Even I'm not that impulsive." Inside was a small silver key. "What's this?" Riley asked, confused. "The key to the garden," Blake explained. "It's always locked to everyone except me. I wanted you to have access whenever you want, for photography, for reflection, or," he hesitated, "to see me." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on Riley. This wasn't just a key, it was access to a private, meaningful part of his life, a symbolic opening of a door that had been closed to others. "Thank you," she said, closing her hand around the key. "I have something for you too, actually." From her small evening bag, Riley withdrew a photograph, one she had taken that morning after Blake left, using her professional camera. It showed her apartment from the perspective of the doorway, capturing the nest of blankets on the couch, the remains of their shared coffee, the morning light streaming through the window, evidence of their extraordinary time together. "So, you remember where this began?" she explained as he took it, his expression softening. "How could I forget?" Blake drew her close, his arms encircling her as they stood beneath the winter sky. "Though I hope this is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" Riley asked, looking up at him. "A new chapter," Blake said simply. "For both of us." Their kiss beneath the stars felt like a promise of possibilities, of connection, of futures neither had imagined before a Christmas blizzard had thrown their lives together. As they stood embraced atop the tower Blake's father had built, the city stretched out below them like a sea of possibilities. The vintage Polaroid camera that had brought them together now sat in Blake's office, loaded with fresh film, ready to capture whatever memories they would create next. In the distance, Chicago was slowly emerging from beneath its blanket of snow. Roads were being cleared, power fully restored, normal life gradually resuming. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Questions about how their different worlds could mesh, practical considerations, the scrutiny that would inevitably come with Blake's public profile. But tonight, under a canopy of winter stars, with the memory of a blizzard that had forced them both to pause and see each other clearly, those concerns seemed distant and manageable. Tonight was about connection, possibility, and the unexpected gift they had found in each other. A gift more precious than anything that could be wrapped in paper and ribbon. "Merry Christmas, Riley Morgan," Blake whispered against her hair. "Merry Christmas, Blake Harrington," she replied, holding him close as snowflakes began to fall once more, gentle this time, drifting lazily around them like nature's blessing on whatever was beginning between them. In the pocket of Blake's discarded jacket, now draped around Riley's shoulders, the Polaroid photograph he had taken of her that morning continued to develop, capturing not just her image, but a moment that had changed everything. The moment when a millionaire who had received a gift from Mrs. Claus on Christmas Eve found himself knocking on her door the very next day, neither of them knowing that the greatest gift of all would be what they discovered in each other.